There are seasons in life when effort remembers us but results do not. When days are full of work yet nights are heavy with doubt. When we wonder if the quiet waiting means we have failed or if we are simply being shaped. This is a story about patience, about the kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, and doesn't demand proof right away. The kind that grows underground, unseen, while the world above looks unchanged. This story will show you why real transformation often begins long before anything looks better, why healing sometimes feels like standing still, and why purpose reveals itself only to those who learn how to wait without giving up. In a small farming town surrounded by dry fields and slow mornings, there lived a man named Daniel Rowan. Daniel Rowan woke before the sun, as he always did, not because an alarm told him to, but because the land had trained him to listen. Morning arrived softly on the farm. A pale blue sky stretched wide and patient above fields that looked unchanged no matter how many days passed. The soil was dry in places, stubborn in others, carrying the memory of past seasons but offering no promises about the next. Daniel stood at the edge of it every morning with the same belief pressed quietly into his chest. If I work hard enough, long enough, something must come. He was not an impatient man by nature. He believed in discipline, in routine, in showing up even when nothing seemed to move. His hands were strong, marked by years of honest labor. His back bent slightly forward, shaped by effort more than age. People in town respected him. They said he was reliable, steady, the kind of man who didn't complain. But beneath that steadiness lived a quiet tension. Daniel believed patience meant endurance, pushing through, holding on, refusing to stop. He believed waiting was something you did while forcing progress. And every morning, as he walked the length of his land, he measured himself against what he could see. Rose without green felt like judgment. Silence felt like rejection. He bent down and let the soil run through his fingers. It was cool beneath the surface, darker than it looked from above. He knew this intellectually, that roots formed in darkness, that growth happened before evidence appeared. He had learned it once, long ago, but knowing and trusting were not the same thing. Each day followed the same rhythm. Water, check, adjust, plan, repeat. His discipline never faltered, but his heart quietly asked the same question again and again. How long is long enough? In the evenings, when the light fell low and shadows stretched across the fields, Daniel felt the weight of stillness press against him. It wasn't peaceful yet. It was heavy, waiting without reassurance, effort without feedback. This was the beginning of his journey, though he did not know it then. Not a journey of distance, but of depth. Not one that required speed, but surrender. The land was not refusing him. It was teaching him. And like most lessons that matter, it began slowly, with quiet soil, unanswered effort, and a man who believed patience meant holding tighter, when what it would soon ask of him was to soften his grip. Daniel Rowan believed deeply in momentum. He believed that movement created answers and that effort, consistent, disciplined effort, could bend time itself. So when the first small signs appeared, he clung to them like proof. A thin line of green broke through the soil one morning. Just a few shoots, fragile, easy to miss, but Daniel saw them immediately. His chest loosened just a little. He knelt down, careful not to touch them, and smiled in a way he hadn't in months. There you are, he thought. I knew it. From that day on, his work intensified, not out of panic, but out of hope, sharpened into urgency. He woke earlier, stayed longer, measured more precisely, adjusted schedules, calculated yield before the season had even settled into itself. Discipline became his shield. Planning became his comfort. In his mind, success was no longer a distant idea. It was a shape he could almost see. Fields filled evenly, harvest bins stacked high, quiet pride returning to his evenings. He began to imagine relief, validation, the feeling of being right for not giving up. People noticed his energy. Neighbors passing by saw him moving faster than before, more purposeful. Some admired it, others quietly wondered if he was rushing the season. But Daniel didn't hear doubt anymore. He heard progress. Every small win fed his belief that patience meant doing more. He checked the soil constantly, sometimes too constantly. He watered even when the ground still held moisture. He adjusted rows that hadn't asked to be moved. He stood watching the sky, counting days, estimating growth before it had time to happen. Hope, when mixed with control, becomes restless. At night, Daniel lay awake planning improvements for a harvest that had not yet arrived. His mind stayed ahead of the land, pulling the future closer, trying to make it behave. He wasn't forcing out of fear, not yet. He was forcing because he wanted certainty, and certainty feels like safety. But something subtle began to shift. The work stopped feeling grounding. It started feeling urgent. When growth slowed, as it naturally does, frustration crept in quietly. Not anger, just a tightness in the chest, a sense that something was lagging behind his effort. He told himself it was normal. Seasons had rhythms, he knew that. But knowing didn't stop him from watching too closely. The land didn't rush, but Daniel did. Still, in those early days, hope outweighed doubt. He stood taller, walked with purpose. The dream of an early harvest shimmered just far enough ahead to keep him moving. What he didn't see, what he couldn't yet understand, was that patience isn't proven by effort alone. It's proven by restraint. By trusting growth, you cannot speed up. And as the fields continued their quiet work beneath the surface, Daniel unknowingly planted something else alongside his crops. An expectation, one that would soon be tested. The season turned without asking Daniel's permission. Days grew warmer, then strangely uneven. Clouds gathered, but did not stay. Rain came, but not when it was needed, and never in the right amount. The soil cracked in places Daniel hadn't seen before. The green that once felt promising slowed, thinned, then stopped altogether. At first he told himself it was temporary. Fields hesitate sometimes, he thought. They always do. So he worked harder. He adjusted irrigation lines late into the night, carried water by hand where machines couldn't reach, dug deeper, changed angles, shifted rows. His discipline sharpened into determination, and determination quietly edged into desperation. Still, the land remained indifferent. Leaves yellowed before they should have. Stalks bent too early. Growth that once hinted at abundance now looked fragile, unsure of itself. Daniel stood in the fields one afternoon, heat pressing down on his shoulders, and felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Helplessness. The realization came slowly, not as a sudden disaster, but as a creeping truth he tried to outwork. Day by day, evidence replaced hope. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and the air went still, Daniel finally allowed himself to stop moving. He looked across the land. There would be no harvest this season. The thought didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, like a sentence spoken without emotion, but its weight settled deep, not just on his shoulders, in his sense of self. Failure is never only about loss. It's about what loss makes us question. Daniel questioned everything: his timing, his judgment, his worth. The discipline he had trusted now felt mocked by the silence of the fields. All that effort, all that care, and nothing to show for it. He sat on the edge of the field as night arrived, hands resting on knees that felt suddenly weak. The land did not apologize. The sky offered no explanation. Nature did not acknowledge his effort, and that hurt more than any storm could have. Because effort without reward feels personal. He felt anger rise, but it had nowhere to land. The land wasn't cruel. It was simply itself, and that truth made the loss feel even heavier. There was no enemy to fight, no mistake he could easily name, just a season that did not cooperate. Daniel went home that night in silence. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't plan tomorrow. He sat at the table long after darkness settled, listening to nothing but his own breath. Something inside him had broken, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The dream of an early harvest was gone. The belief that discipline guaranteed reward cracked open, and in its place stood a question he had never allowed himself to ask. What if effort is not enough? The season had failed, and for the first time, Daniel felt as though he had failed with it. Daniel did not accept the season's verdict. Acceptance felt too close to surrender, and surrender felt like erasing everything he had given. So instead of stopping, he tightened his grip on the land. He woke even earlier, stayed out even later, and pushed his body as if exhaustion itself were an enemy he could defeat. He told himself he was being strong. He told himself this was discipline. But discipline, when driven by fear, becomes punishment. The fields became a battleground. Every dry patch felt like a personal challenge. Every weak stalk felt like a betrayal. Daniel worked through the heat without pause, ignoring hunger, ignoring rest, ignoring the quiet voice inside that asked him to slow down. He convinced himself that if he could just do more, the land would respond. So he fought the weather. He cursed the sky for its silence, measured clouds like promises, counted days since the last rain with a bitterness he didn't recognize in himself. When storms passed nearby without touching his fields, he felt something twist inside his chest, a mix of envy and accusation. Why not here? Letting go would have meant admitting that the season was beyond his control, that no amount of effort could change what had already been decided, and Daniel was not ready to face that truth. He replayed the past obsessively. Every decision, every adjustment, every moment he might have done something differently. Guilt layered itself over exhaustion, turning his thoughts heavy and repetitive. Obsession is grief that refuses to rest. He walked the fields even when there was nothing left to check. Not because the land needed him, but because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant feeling the loss fully. People noticed his withdrawal. Invitations went unanswered. Conversations shortened. When neighbors spoke about next season, Daniel turned away. The future felt like an accusation, not a promise. Inside him, time froze. The land had moved on. The season had ended. But Daniel stayed behind, clinging to a version of himself who still believed effort could rewrite reality. At night, sleep came in fragments. His body lay still, but his mind worked relentlessly, replaying what was already over. Letting go felt dangerous, as if releasing the season would erase the meaning of all the work that came before it. But holding on came at a cost. His hands shook from fatigue. His shoulders ached constantly. His chest felt tight, like something inside him was pressing outward, asking for space he refused to give. Daniel was fighting the weather and losing, not because he wasn't strong enough, but because strength cannot change what has already passed. And until he learned the difference between persistence and resistance, the land would remain silent, and so would his heart. There comes a moment after every long struggle when the body finally stops, not because the fight is over, but because there is nothing left to give. For Daniel Rowan, that moment arrived without ceremony. One morning he stood at the edge of his land and felt no urge to step forward. The tools remained where they were. The rows lay untouched. The fields stretched out in front of him, unchanged and indifferent, and for the first time he did not feel anger. He felt nothing. The silence was heavier than exhaustion. It pressed in slowly, filling the space where effort used to live. Daniel stopped walking the land, stopped checking the sky, stopped measuring time by growth or failure. Days passed without distinction. Mornings blurred into evenings. Waiting now felt pointless. He withdrew from the world in small, quiet ways. He ate only when hunger forced him to, spoke only when necessary. The routines that once gave his life structure now felt hollow, stripped of meaning. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It settles in like fog. Daniel spent long hours sitting on the porch, staring at fields that no longer asked anything of him. The land had moved on, but he had not followed. Without the work, without the struggle, he wasn't sure who he was meant to be. Failure has a way of shrinking our world. He replayed the season endlessly in his mind, not with anger anymore, but with a dull ache. Questions lingered without answers. What was the point? What did all that effort mean if it led here? Even hope felt exhausting. The nights were the hardest. In the quiet, thoughts grew louder. Doubt wrapped itself around old beliefs, tightening until nothing felt solid. The discipline he once trusted now felt naive. The patience he thought he had practiced now felt like a lie. He wondered if he had misunderstood life entirely. There is a loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from feeling unseen by the world itself. Daniel felt as though the land had turned its back on him, and with it the sense of purpose that once guided his days. This was his lowest point, not dramatic, not desperate, just empty. And yet in that emptiness, something subtle began to happen. When everything familiar falls away, what remains is raw truth. No expectations, no illusions, just stillness. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this silence was not punishment. It was a pause, a space where something new could enter, if he allowed it. The fields were empty. So was his heart. And sometimes, that is exactly where change begins. Daniel met the old gardener on a morning that felt no different from the others. The air was cool, the sky pale, the kind of day that carried no promise and no threat. Daniel had wandered farther than usual, following a narrow dirt path that curved behind his land and disappeared into a stretch of smaller, older fields. Places most people no longer worked. Places that looked forgotten. That was where he saw him. An elderly man stood beside a modest garden, moving slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had softened around him. His back was bent, his hands thin but steady. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't correcting. He was simply tending, touching the soil, adjusting a leaf, stepping back. Daniel watched for a while without speaking. The garden was nothing impressive. No wide fields, no perfect rows, just a few plants unevenly spaced, growing at their own pace. And yet, there was something calm about it, something alive. Finally, the old man noticed Daniel. "Land looks different when you stop trying to win against it," he said gently, without accusation. Daniel didn't know why, but the words landed deeper than expected. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. "I did everything right," Daniel said after a pause. "Still lost the season." The old gardener nodded, as if this was not new information, as if he had heard this sentence many times before from many different people. "Yes," he replied. "That happens." There was no comfort in his voice, no apology, just truth. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Then what's the point?" he asked quietly. "Of waiting? Of patience? Of all that effort?" The old man smiled, not wide, not amused, but knowing. "Patience isn't waiting for things to work out," he said. "It's learning how to stay gentle when they don't." He knelt down, pressed his fingers into the soil, then let it fall back naturally. "Roots don't rush," he continued. "They grow when conditions allow. You can water them, protect them, but you can't pull them into being ready." Daniel watched the soil fall through the old man's hands, feeling something shift inside him. "I thought patience meant holding on," Daniel admitted. The gardener looked up at him. "Sometimes it does," he said, "and sometimes it means loosening your grip so something else can grow." They stood in silence for a moment. No lesson followed, no instructions, just the sound of wind moving gently through leaves that did not look hurried at all. Before Daniel left, the old man added one more thing, almost as an afterthought. "The season didn't fail you," he said softly. "It taught you where you're still trying to control what can only be trusted." Daniel walked home slowly that day. Nothing had changed in the fields. Nothing had been fixed. But for the first time since the loss, the silence felt different. Less like judgment, more like space. Change did not arrive as motivation. It arrived as permission. Daniel Rowan did not wake the next morning with renewed energy or sudden clarity. There was no dramatic shift, no surge of purpose pulling him out of bed. What came instead was quieter, a gentler way of standing in the day. He returned to the fields, but not with the urgency that once drove him. He walked them slowly, hands behind his back, noticing details he had rushed past before. The uneven ground, the way some areas held moisture longer, the subtle differences in color beneath the surface. For the first time, he wasn't asking the land to respond. He was listening. He remembered the old gardener's words, "Roots don't rush," and something in him softened. He began to work again, but differently. Not harder, not faster, just honestly. He cleared what needed clearing, repaired what was broken, prepared the soil without expectation of immediate reward. He stopped checking progress every hour, stopped calculating outcomes before beginnings had settled. This new discipline felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Doing less felt like risk, but slowly the tightness in his chest eased. The work stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like care, not just for the land but for himself. Waiting became active in a different way. Daniel learned to leave space, to walk away when nothing more could be done, to trust that unseen work was still work. That growth did not require his constant presence to exist. Some days doubt returned. It whispered familiar questions. What if this is just another delay? What if patience is just another name for failure? But now, Daniel did not fight the questions. He let them pass, like clouds moving across a sky that did not need to react. Healing does not mean certainty. It means peace without it. He began sleeping better, eating regularly, speaking again, small conversations, unremarkable, human. Life re-entered the spaces that effort had once occupied entirely, and beneath the soil, something began to happen. Not just in the fields, but in Daniel himself. He was no longer trying to force the future. He was learning how to meet the present. This was the beginning of rebirth, not loud, not visible, but real. The storm did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as doubt. Daniel Rowan noticed it first in his thoughts, not the sky. A familiar restlessness crept back into his mornings. He found himself standing a little longer than necessary at the edge of the fields, scanning for signs, measuring progress that had not yet asked to be measured. The season was changing again. Not dramatically, just enough to stir old habits. Rain clouds gathered one afternoon and passed without stopping. The air grew heavy, then dry again. And something inside Daniel tightened, almost automatically. His hands itched to intervene, to adjust, to do more. Just in case, his mind whispered. This was the real test, not failure but uncertainty after healing has begun. The moment when old instincts return, dressed as responsibility. Daniel caught himself reaching for the tools late one evening, long after the work was done. His body remembered urgency. It remembered control. For a moment he stood there, torn between who he had been and who he was becoming. Patience is not proven once. It is chosen repeatedly. The storm came a few days later, sudden, uneven, disruptive. Rain fell too hard, too fast, then stopped abruptly. The land absorbed what it could. Some areas flooded briefly, others barely drank at all. Daniel felt panic rise in his chest. This was where he used to fight. He walked the fields, heart pounding, noticing every imperfection. Old thoughts returned in sharp flashes. You should have prepared more. You should have acted sooner. This will ruin everything. But this time he stopped himself. He stood still in the middle of the field, rainwater soaking into his boots, breath shallow but steady. The urge to control was strong, stronger than before, because now he knew what was at stake. Not the crops, his peace. He remembered the gardener's hands releasing soil, remembered how restraint had felt like strength for the first time in his life. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel stepped back. He did what was necessary. Nothing more. No frantic corrections, no obsessive checking, just care without panic. The storm passed, the land settled, and so did he. That night, Daniel slept deeply, not because everything was safe, but because he trusted himself not to abandon what he had learned. Transformation does not mean storms stop coming. It means you stop losing yourself inside them. When morning came, the fields were imperfect, but alive. And Daniel felt something stronger than relief. He felt grounded. The bloom did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, the way all lasting things seem to do, without urgency, without spectacle, without asking to be admired. Daniel Rowan noticed it one morning while walking the fields with no expectations in his chest. There was green where he had stopped looking for it. Not dramatic, not overflowing, just steady, alive. The soil looked darker now, richer, as if it had been holding its breath and finally decided to exhale. Plants stood with a calm confidence, rooted deeper than before, shaped by irregular rain and patient care. Daniel didn't rush forward. He stood still for a long moment, hands resting loosely at his sides, feeling something unfamiliar rise within him. Not excitement, not triumph, but gratitude. This time he did not measure the growth. He did not calculate outcomes. He did not imagine praise or relief waiting at the end. He simply allowed the moment to be what it was. Success, he realized, feels different when you are no longer chasing it. The days that followed carried a new rhythm. Daniel worked with consistency, not urgency. He showed up, did what was needed, and walked away when it was done. The land responded, not dramatically, but faithfully. And somewhere along the way, something inside Daniel shifted permanently. He noticed how his body felt lighter, even during long days, how his thoughts no longer raced ahead of the moment, how peace had taken root before the harvest ever did. Purpose no longer felt like pressure. It felt like alignment. Neighbors commented on the fields, on how balanced everything looked. Daniel smiled politely but didn't explain. Words felt unnecessary. What he had learned couldn't be taught through advice, only lived through seasons. There were still uncertainties, still risks, still variables beyond his control, but they no longer felt threatening. They felt natural. The harvest came, modest, honest, sufficient, and Daniel realized something profound as he stood among the rows one evening, watching the sun settle low across the land. The greatest reward of patience was not what it produced. It was who it shaped him into while he waited. The bloom had arrived, but long before the fields changed, Daniel had. If you're listening to this, there is a chance you are standing in your own quiet season, a place where effort feels invisible, where patience feels misunderstood, where waiting feels heavier than doing. Daniel Rowan's story was never really about farming. It was about learning the difference between discipline and control, between holding on and holding wisely, between forcing life and trusting it. Sometimes motivation doesn't come to push you forward. Sometimes it comes to teach you how to stay still without breaking. There will be moments when your hard work does not bloom on time. Moments when failure arrives despite your best intentions. That does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. Growth is not a performance. It is a process. Healing begins when you stop demanding proof and start allowing progress. Strength grows when you choose patience, even when fear tells you to rush. Purpose becomes clear when you stop chasing outcomes and start honoring the journey. Letting go is not quitting. It is releasing what no longer needs your grip. You don't need to fight every storm. You don't need to control every outcome. You don't need immediate results to be on the right path. Some of the most important transformations happen underground, where no one claps, no one notices, and no one rushes you. That is where roots grow deep enough to survive future storms. If you are tired, rest without guilt. If you are waiting, wait with dignity. If you have failed, remember this. Rebirth is not dramatic. It is quiet, honest, and earned over time. Peace does not come when everything works out. It comes when you learn to stay whole even when things don't. So keep showing up, gently. Keep choosing patience, daily. Keep trusting the work you cannot yet see. Because one day when the bloom arrives quietly, you will realize something powerful. You were never behind. You were becoming. If this story gave you a moment of calm, clarity, or courage, share it with someone who might be waiting in silence. And if you want more stories like this, stories about discipline, failure, healing, and purpose, stay connected. The journey continues, and your roots are already growing.